Today's speaker is Mark Francis. Mark is a professor of landscape architecture here at UC Davis. He's been in the department since 1980, I believe. Much of his work focuses on community design, but a particular focus on the quality of public spaces. Mark's got a pretty broad background in terms of training, both in landscape architecture and urban design, from Harvard, MIT, and Berkeley, I believe. Are there other universities?
That's enough.
And he's also a founding partner of co-design with Rob Fair, emeritus professor here as well, and has done work through co-design here in the U.S. and throughout the world. He's also a prolific researcher and writer. He has published numerous articles and books. Some of the titles of his books include Urban Open Space, Public Space, The Meaning of Gardens, and Community Open Spaces. So please join me in welcoming Mark Francis.
Thank you, Michael. I am an official senior member of the faculty since I've been here. Byron and I think, are the longest standing members of the landscape architecture faculty, and all that really means is I have more gray hair than most people in the program. The title of my talk is Habits of the Proactive Practitioner. I invite you to say that 10 times very fast. It's a very difficult title, but I think you'll understand what it means in a little bit. Michael, last time in his introductory lecture, gave a great overview of where what I call, there's lots of different terms, advocacy planning and design activism, but I call it community design. I think he gave a good framework, and he's asked a number of us, I guess I'm the first one, to talk, really to use their own work to kind of illustrate how that might work in practice, so you can get an idea if you go out and do landscape architecture, if you do urban design, if you do sustainable planning, whatever it is, how you might work in this way. So what I want to do is first talk a little bit about what I mean by proactive practice, because it's a little different, I think, than what you might call advocacy planning, and to try and show you how that's different than traditional practice, the way that most professionals work. And it really is a different way. What I'm going to present to you today is, I would say, is an entirely different way of not just thinking, but actually working as an architect, a landscape architect, urban designer. I started down this road doing a lot of community design projects in the Bay Area and Boston and New York City, and then started to do some when I got to Davis. I'll show you some of that in a minute. And then I was asked in the early 1980s to do a talk for the Community Design Association, which is an organization that Michael's very involved in. So they brought me back to the American Institute of Architects headquarters in Washington. I did this paper that was kind of a review of where community design was. So that was kind of where what I'm going to present you, really started. And then over time, as I did more projects, I kind of changed my mind about things. And then in the late 90s, was asked to give a talk at the Environmental Design Research Association meeting in Montreal. And I did it on proactive practice. And after the talk, Donlin Linden, who's the editor of Places, asked me if he could publish it, and I wrote it up. And I'm going to give Michael the links to these articles. You don't need to write all this stuff down. If you want, you can have it, the whole version of the article. And then more recently, I was able to kind of bring it up to date at a meeting of the Pacific Rim Community Design Association, which is a group of people who do really good work in China, Japan, Taiwan, United States, who've been meeting for about 10 years now, I think, talking about common methods, case studies, examples of doing this kind of work. And Michael and I were both asked to present our work at their meeting in Japan. And I tried to take the proactive practice stuff and say, well, what does that really mean for how we train all of you that are students, how we might train you to work in this tradition. That group is an interesting group, and I just brought a few copies. You're welcome to take one of these. We have some extras. This is a proceedings of one of those meetings that happened after that we were co-sponsors with the University of Washington School of Architecture, and there's there's some good stuff in there. So if any of this resonates with you, think it's kind of, you're interested in it, get a book, or I'll get you a book after. So I want to lay the kind of basic concept, and then I want to really use my own work. Most of it focused, I'm just using stuff here really locally in this region, not some of the other things I've been doing recently, but to kind of illustrate not what the work is itself, but to reflect on the work and say, how is this really different than the way that you might work in an office as a landscape architect, as an architect. So that's my plan. And I want to start out by reading just some preamble here. I think it'll explain kind of the big idea, and then I'll go through the examples. Community participation in design and planning had its beginnings in the advocacy planning movement of the 1960s, and Michael gave us an overview of that last week. Its promise was that by involving and empowering citizens, planning and design would become more socially and environmentally responsible. While community participation has become firmly institutionalized, this is a key point because you have to do it now. Everybody has to do it, basically. It also has become more of a tool for defending exclusionary conservative principles than for promoting social justice and ecological vision. So I'm presenting kind of a critical view of participation. There's some real limits to it. It's not as good and warm and cuddly as some of us would like to think. It's got some issues. The problem lies not in the concept of participation, but in the roles that designers and planners have taken in relationship to their clients and projects. The traditional culture of professional practice can be characterized as client-serving rather than vision-making. You serve the client rather than come up with a strong vision. And it's based on the premise that clients come to designers seeking professional assistance. That's your relationship. You're hired, you're paid to work with them to come up with a design. Firms propose, then negotiate a scope of services with their clients. The boundaries and problems are narrowly defined to avoid conflict and to make channels of control clear. You're really at the beck and call of the client. Participation is usually done to satisfy mandated requirements, and it is not intended to fully engage the community. And this is where the critique of participation comes in. You do it because you have to. You don't do it because you really want the citizens or the users or the kids or whoever you're working with to make the decisions. You kind of want to do it because you want to keep your client happy. In this process, the professional is an advocate for the client, whether public or private, and the relationship is restricted by the culture of practice, contract law, and concerns with liability, and the liability often is a big one. The problems with this approach is that usually the client comes to the designer or planner with a solution, not a problem. And this is, I'm speaking from my own experience. They want you to design a park. They want you to design a housing area. Your job often is to decorate the solution, not to really ask what the problem is. The charge to the professional is to give form to the client's preconceived solution, and the visionary hands of the professional are often tied. You don't really get to put your own ideas out there. For example, a client may want to design a park or a plaza, but does not ask the professional to spend time defining the problem or exploring whether there really is, if the park is the best solution for the problem. For example, research may reveal that a garden would address the community's needs better than a park if you really spent the time to do it, but they've asked you to design a park, not a garden. This is where you get in that kind of bind with this role with the client. Professionals may involve the community, as they often are required to do, but their allegiance remains firmly with the paying client. I propose an alternative way of working, and this is where proactive practice comes in. It's a fundamentally different approach to professional practice. It is much more different than traditionally taught and practiced in environmental design schools, and we share some of this problem here, I think, even though I teach here. One in which the design professionals take a stronger visionary problem-solving role. And this is what we want you all to do when you get out of here, is to be brave and to be able and put forward strong visions as well as, serve your client. The essential qualities that distinguish proactive professionals from their traditional counterparts are that the professional is visionary in their approach and is committed to a participatory approach, though this is often, the vision is often modified or changed as the project goes along. You often utilize skills in risk-taking, negotiation, and entrepreneurial enterprise as a proactive practitioner, and you base your thoughts and actions on strong social and environmental values, which we all have and we want to use. And you employ advocacy as a part of your approach, and you are skillful in implementation to make sure your vision is realized. You often employ sound research and analysis. This is where doing your homework is really important as a professional. And you're also involved long-term. These are things, the projects that I'm going to show you, some of them today will not be realized in my lifetime. They're 20, 30, maybe 100-year projects. So you need to stick with it. That's one of the points. Before I go into the work, I want to state something very clearly. This is an important point. What I'm talking about is really not for everyone. I don't think everyone can work as a proactive practitioner. It requires a certain personality, a willingness to take risk, and an ability to stand up for what you believe in at certain points that might be a very awkward and even lonely and unfriendly process. On some of these projects, I've gotten involved in things where people who are friends are not friends anymore because they had a different opinion. But I felt strongly that the projects really should happen. But you also need to know when you're wrong and be able to admit when you're wrong. So it's partly standing up for what you believe in, but modify your vision as you go through the process. So that's the kind of preamble. That's what I'm going to talk about. Now, what I'd like to do is go through some examples. These are just three that show that landscape architects, I think, a lot of them today, really are working in this tradition. The project on the top, Orange County Great Park in Irvine, is in the old El Toro Marine Base, which is now getting built as a very, very large park, about twice the size of Central Park in New York. I was on the jury to select the designers to get the first ideas, and then we picked Ken Smith from New York, and you can see his design in the middle, and on the right, they actually made a huge mock-up of it in the courtyard at the Irvine City Hall so people could come and look at it and understand it. And actually on the left, you can see they could walk around on it. The project on the bottom left is a competition that I was involved with where I was invited to work with Giancarlo De Carlo, an Italian architect, to do a major park and cultural center in Milan, Italy. And the project on the right is the work of Peter Latz in Germany, where he took an old factory and turned it into a cultural park. And it's an example of kind of sustainable design that's widely used today. Now, I put this in because Michael didn't show it the other day, and I think it's an important one. There's two things that influenced my generation of community designers or proactive practitioners. One was the Paul Davidoff article that was mentioned called Advocacy and Pluralism in Planning. It kind of knocked our socks off. We changed everything that we were doing in school when we read that in the 60s. And the other one is Sherry Arnstein's Ladder of Participation. And this is very simple, very easy to understand, and extremely powerful. And basically what it says is that there's different kinds of participation. Some of it really gives people power and control over decisions, which is kind of at the high end of the ladder, citizen control. But a lot of it can be about manipulation, just going in and trying to force a preconceived idea on somebody under the name of participation. And unfortunately, a lot of the traditional professional practice, I think the stuff that's being done today is kind of at the lower rungs, and is really not giving this kind of power to the participants. And it's done under the rubric of advocacy planning or participation. Now, in the paper that I talked about that I first did in the 80s for the AIA, I tried to distinguish between traditional practice and proactive practice or community design. And I just wanted to run through these. And I think they still kind of hold up. I mean, they're 20 years, 25 years old now, maybe. And I modified them a bit. But again, this point that one is client-oriented, while the other one is really driven by the vision of the designer and the community. Traditional practice is typically solution-oriented, while proactive practice, you're involved in figuring out really what the problem is so you get the right solution. Traditional practice, because you're trying to make a living, is concerned in profit and business, while proactive practice is more concerned with social and environmental suitability. You're jumping to the client's needs in the former, while you're responding more to the community, maybe, and other environmental needs in the other. You do participation because you have to under traditional practice. Proactive practice, you do it because you're really committed to it, because you want to do it. And that's a big difference. The client provides the program in the first. Research and analysis and homework provides it in the second. And that's basically some fundamental differences. Now, not everything works in that kind of, black and white kind of way, one column or the other. They're kind of blends or hybrids. But there's a lot of cultures or ways of doing this. And the projects I'll show you kind of fall into, I think, probably all of these. One is what I call the private visionary. This is another a way of working really as a single professional, or as a small office, or even a large office, where you're hanging your shingle out and doing this kind of work, but for pay. The other is the public professional. This is working through a government agency, local, state, national, where you have strong public values you're trying to promote, but you're really trying to work in a proactive practice kind of way. This is a kind of a newer one, and it's one I always encourage all of you as students to think about when you look for jobs, because I think it's one of the best areas of practice today. And that's working within a nonprofit organization like a land trust, a community garden association, a watershed group, the University Arboretum, whatever it is that is out there doing good work. They are hiring landscape architects. A lot of our students work for organizations like the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy and things like that. This is kind of where I fall, I guess, a lot of what I do, because I get a regular paycheck from the university, is doing this as a faculty member, professor, and one of the projects was really done that way. And then a number of the things are really kind of hybrids. They're a little bit of all of the above. So again, to turn to examples, and I want to preamble this part with 2 points. One for the seniors who are in here. I presented some of these before, so bear with me. I'm going to focus more on the way that we did the projects, and also to give credit to my colleagues who are here in the audience, Jim Zanetto and Skip Mesger, who were my partners and co-conspirators at co-design, and had their fingerprints are all over these projects just as much as mine. So these are projects that were collaborations, and I think to do the kind of work I'm going to show you, you don't do it by yourself. You got to do it with the community, but you have to do it with other great professionals, be it landscape architects, and others. The first one I call the Davis Town Square. And this is the first project that I worked on when I came here. And I came from New York City, where I had done a lot of work on public space and community open space and things like that. And I got to Davis, and I looked around, and I said, there's only like 6 places where you can sit outside and eat your lunch. In fact, I think it was illegal in 1980 to serve food outside in Davis. I think there was an ordinance against it. And, I grew up in Santa Barbara. I'd been living in lots of places, and I thought, Davis needs a town square. It needs a place for people to gather. And I looked around, and I discovered that the parking lot in front of Baskin-Robbins, which is still there, Baskin-Robbins is still there. The parking lot's still there, too, part of it, was the cognitive center of the downtown. That's kind of where you would meet people. So I got this idea, wouldn't it be great to get rid of those 35 parking spaces and do a plaza and really make a gathering point? So I got some people together in town who liked the idea. Mike Corbett, who did Village Homes, Richard Berteau, John Mott Smith, others. And we thought it was a good idea to put this idea forward, and we did it in the way that I was used to working, a kind of participatory way. So we did a town meeting which is now Pete's Coffee downtown. It was an empty storefront. We had, maps and drawings, and we invited everybody in the city to come. And, I went to the first meeting, and you couldn't even get in the door. It was just packed. And, I thought, great, we've got all this participation. And the first words out of the community's mouth was, you take one parking space away, we will sue you. And that was 1982. So this project is kind of an example of a failed project. I want to show the good ones and I want to show the bad ones. I think this is not to say that the result is bad, but the process really failed. I think and largely because it was an idea before its time, but it had a vision attached to it, something I felt strongly about that kind of carried through a bunch of stuff that eventually came around 15 years later and was able to happen. So after many tried and failed attempts to build this thing in about, and Skip, help me here. When was construction completed on the East Street Plaza? Okay, so we're 20 years. So it took 20 years to not get 35 parking spaces, but to get half of those away and to get this thing built. And you can go down and see it and evaluate it. My take on this project is it was too little, too late. We should have done more. It should have been bigger. It should have happened earlier, but it happened, and it is a form of proactive practice. I mean, it took 20 years, and a lot of other people, probably Jeff Lux, when he came to town as the planning director, was a key person. So through that failed project, I got involved in another project, and this is a longer story, and I'm not going to have time to tell it all, but one of the people on the committee with me, I think the vice chair, I was the chair of the committee working on the town square idea. The vice chair was the owner of Carousel Stationery downtown, which actually just went out of business, Roy Knopf. And Roy was kind of a senior statesman in the business community. And he took me aside after one of our meetings, and he put his arm around me and said, Mark, we're not against the park. We just don't think you should do it there. We think you should go over and do it in Central Park. And I thought about that. I thought, what a stupid idea. Why would I ever do that? That you want to put it in front of his shop so he would benefit, right, rather than 5 blocks away from the center of town. But the more that I thought about it, the more I thought that actually was kind of a brilliant idea. So the slide on the left shows Central Park when I got involved in it in about 1984, 83 maybe. I don't have a pointer, so I can't really show you, but you can see on the left side there's a street that goes through. That was 4th Street. It used to divide the historic park, which is 1 block square to the north, from a parking lot, which is called the Arden Mayfair parking lot. And when I got involved, the city council had already decided and actually signed a development agreement with a group called Terranomics in the Bay Area to build a shopping mall on the Arden Mayfair lot. It was a done deal. This is how, some of these principles of really standing up for what you believe in, I'm not just saying me, but a lot of others, really can make a difference. So I had an urban design studio then, and I said, okay, well, we'll take this on as a design project and just kind of ask the question, which nobody had really asked before, is, well, maybe the solution isn't a shopping mall. Maybe the solution to the problem is a larger park. Davis then was about 30,000 people. I thought, well, we're going to double in size pretty quickly, which we have. We're about over 60 now. The little Central Park, we're going to outgrow it. It'd be nice to have a larger park. The farmers market was on a street, was very kind of temporary. It would be nice to give them a permanent facility, integrate them in the park. Anyway, the short version of it is we did a survey of the community. We went to all the Safeways and stood outside the students and asked people, would you like a park? Would you like a shopping area? Would you like a parking lot? All the options. And the expanded park came out as a kind of a very strong preference. And rather than just leave it in the studio, I had the students send it in, and it was published on the front page of the Davis Enterprise. Davis residents prefer park over shopping mall. And Mark Francis in the second sentence, my phone starts ringing. Chamber of Commerce, what are you doing? You're screwing up everything that we've done. City Council, you can't do that. What are And I went, well, it's just an idea. It's just a proposal. So I went away on sabbatical for a year, went to Scandinavia, and then when I came back, I was pleased to find that a group of folks, mostly who live around the park, had formed an organization called Save Open Space, SOS. Warren probably still remembers that. You could still see bumper stickers in town, says SOS. And they put it on the ballot as a referendum, and the residents voted, and it was about 2/3 in favor of the expanded park. And I came back from my sabbatical, and we had gotten another project. Jim and I, actually, our very first project, remember, what that was Senda Nueva, or was that it? Or the one in North Davis. Anyway, we got a little project up there. We did a great plan for them. I won't name the developers, and we got it all done, and they got their approval, and they fired us. And that was like our first office project. We were like so hurt by that. But luckily, we had an office, and we got hired to do the master plan for Central Park, and that. So this is kind of a private, it's kind of that hybrid one. It started out a kind of university activist, becoming private visionary, trying to work through a private office to make it happen. And here's a picture of one of the design workshops that we did early on in the park. There's Jim sitting in the middle, the red shirt on, Jim Zanetto, Carrie Dawson, who was one of the partners, was director of the Arboretum for a while, and now is actually in charge of developing the west side of Manhattan as a park. It's called the Hudson River Parkway in Manhattan. And the plane that crashed, I was going to call him today because it crashed right into his project. It was literally right on what he's working on. But anyway, that's another. So I'm not going to talk so much about the project. I mean, I think most of you have been there, been to the market, seen it. Very successful. Took a lot of frustrating process. There was a lot of complicated things to it. Probably the hardest part of the project, from my point of view, and I think Jim would agree with me because he did this, was designing the farmers market structure, because that had never been done before. We really did it the first time anybody had put a farmers market in a park, so we were kind of making it up as we went, and the farmers market had their own ideas, and they wanted it bigger, and they wanted it a building, and they wanted all kinds of ideas, and we kept saying, no, this is a park. We kept getting them. Finally, one day, I remember we went out there, and we had some of the farmers come with their trucks, and we took bags of flour, and we kind of laid it out on the parking lot, right? And that kind of, that kind of broke the ice in terms of, okay, well, that can work, and that's kind of what you see there today. Jim did the design for the structure, which I think is really wonderful. It's not a enclosure in the sense that it keeps the rain off your head, but it really is a shade structure, which is very important in this climate, and works really well, and it's held up quite well. This is where you get into the design stuff, where you have visions. I mean, one of the visions or ideas that I had from the beginning was to take the market, where people would go in the market on the street, which is probably about 3 times of what it is now, maybe 40 feet or so, and bring it down to, I think this is about 12 feet, so that, if you run into your neighbor who you never talk to on your street, but you see him at the farmer's market, you actually have to say hello. I mean, you can't get past them without at least being polite and saying hello. So there's a lot of kind of European market rubbing shoulders and things, and again, you can go down and look at that and see what you think. I do research, and I'm interested in research as well as design, and design projects are great ways to ask questions and do focus research at the same time that you do design. So there was a bunch of stuff that I was thinking about. I'd been doing some work on community gardens and why people build community gardens, and I thought, well, we'll put a garden in the park. Rather than do just a grass and tree park, it's a typical Davis kind of park, community park, whatever, we would create what I called then more of a mixed-use park, where we'd put in a garden, we'd put in a teen center, there was going to be a science center, there was going to be a cafe, there was going to be all kinds of other uses, including the farmer's market. Over time, my thinking has changed, and this is what I called it today, not mixed use, but mixed life. I think Central Park really is a mixed life place. And it's one of the few places, it is the only place, I would say, in Davis that if something significant happens and the community needs to come together, you don't even need to tell each other. You just go to Central Park. It's that kind of place. And I remember the horrific thing that happened in Columbine, where the kids shot up the high school. And, after that, the community in Littleton, Colorado came together, to deal with that horrific event. And the only place they could meet was in the parking lot at the shopping mall. There was not a Central Park where they could go. We were lucky. We have this place. We have this mixed life place called Central Park. And I've been writing some and arguing that every community needs at least one mixed-life place. The garden, we did as a volunteer project. We didn't have enough money to build our design because it was done in phases. So we were able to get some plants in, and it was kind of not doing very well for a number of years. And then Emily Griswold, thank you, from the Arboretum stepped in and organized a garden group, kind of friends with the garden group, called the Davis Garden, Public Garden, I guess. Got an agreement with the city to come in and fix it up, and they've done just a beautiful, beautiful job. It's really taking our design. If you look back at our original master plan for the park, it really is following the design, but finishing it. I always tried to get the city council to finish the park, and they would say, "Why would we finish the park? It's great. Everybody loves it. Why would we spend any more money on Central Park?" I said, "Well, the design's not finished. There's all this other stuff," and so they've been completing it. And one of my greatest happinesses, I guess, in this project is that it's one of the few parks in California, major urban parks, where you have tomatoes growing in the center of it. So these are part of the public gardens. So that was a paid project. It was with the city, but it involved some around-the-scenes kind of stuff. I remember one night at the city council where there was a vote about keeping 4th Street open. There was a proposal to do 2 parks and keep the street open because the Chamber of Commerce wanted the street open. And we had to do a lot of work to convince the city council to say, no, it has to be closed. We need to do 1 park. And we were there until 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember it was a 3-2 vote, and we won. And we could do the design that should be done there. So this project is the complete opposite. Nobody asked us to do it. Nobody ever paid us to do it. There's a lot of people in town that didn't want us to do it, probably still wish we wouldn't have done it, but we did it, and it's an interesting one. When I was working on different projects in co-design, I became interested in how to take all those individual projects and weave it into more like an open space network where things would actually connect. So like, if you go to the market in the morning with your kids and your bikes, you can go from the farmer's market and get on a street and get out to a natural area and maybe go out to Yolo Basin Wildlife Preserve and have your lunch with your kids and then bike back in and go to a soccer game and create this kind of integrated network. And I was appointed to the committee redoing the City of Davis general plan. I think this is about 86, I think. And I was very frustrated because nobody really understood this notion of open space. They were just thinking growth control. We need to keep the city small and we need to buy all the land around us and keep Davis small. And we were able to do this. I was able to kind of put out this idea of an integrated open space plan, and nobody listened. I mean, basically nobody listened. So what do? You say, okay, well, that was a nice idea, and you go on to the next project, but I was stupid enough to keep going. So I got Carrie Dawson, who I showed you the picture of, and Stan Jones, who was a student of ours, and I had done a sketch, a concept for this, and we got together one night in our old research center with a couple 6-packs of beer and an aerial photograph and some trace acetate, and we started drawing. We came up with basically this thing, which is, I'm not going to describe it, but basically it's kind of like a bicycle wheel with a rim, so you can walk or bike or run a marathon around the city without ever crossing a road. It's about 20 miles of continuous bikeway. And then the spokes are kind of green streets and green belts and parks, and they all kind of fit together. And that was kind of the vision and some of the spaces that would be included. This is actually one of the co-design projects out in Aspen, Greenbelt. So we were actually working on the individual pieces of it, kind of thinking, well, maybe someday this will all kind of add up into this greenway idea. But nothing really kind of happened with it. Stan did it as a senior project. He sent it to the city council. Ann Evans, who was on the city council, read it on her vacation in Sweden. And she called me up and said, I think we should do this. And she asked the city manager to do it. And then suddenly we got a call at co-design. Can you help the city organize a participatory process to get the community involved in the greenway? So we ran some workshops. And the result of that is that it was integrated as the open space element for the City of Davis general plan. And that's kind of the way it is now. It's held up. It was just reaffirmed last December, a year ago December, by the city council as the overall framework to guide the growth of the city. And this is just a diagram that I did. It's not very good, but it shows the yellow is stuff that's already been built. The red chartreuse is stuff that are kind of missing links, but we've kind of gotten about 60% of it built. My guess is the city has spent probably about $10 million on it. It's generated, I would guess, probably about $500,000 of professional fees for offices, mostly offices that weren't ours, but there were other offices, which is fine. And it's really taken off, and I think one of the things that's helped is that some graduate students here in transportation in August 2007 went out and got the city to spray paint on the Davis bike loop. And anybody done the bike loop in here? It's really worth the ride. You can do kind of inner loop of the Greenway. There's a couple places where you have to cross roads, but it's a good example of all the different open spaces in town. And you just follow this blue line, and actually there's a blue line that runs right on the corner here, so you can get on it right here. It goes out through the Arboretum into the south. What? Yeah, right by Mac Hall. One more project. Davis Commons came up after Central Park before we finished the East Street Plaza. We got a call from the developer who wanted to do something a little different there, where you put the parking lot in the back and the public space in the front. I think you all know it, where Borders is. And we really liked his ideas. He liked what we had done at Central Park. I saw it as an opportunity to kind of improve on some things we did in Central Park. Like on the slide on the right are all those walls which you could actually sit and hang out in the space without having to buy any food, to really make it feel like more of a public space. So there was a number of things that we did in it. One of which shows the site plan, but the Greenway connected things. It took the Arboretum and connected it with the downtown, right? So here in this project was a chance to kind of make that link. So there's a piece that comes through the parking lot, comes down into the Arboretum. So that was kind of one of the things we learned from this project. The other thing was sittable space. We learned a lot in Central Park about creating sittable space and making people feel comfortable hanging out outside. So those concepts kind of carried on in my work, and this is some work I just want to show you. We just finished in November. Stephen Ramirez, a student here, and I have done this together. And I was just interested in the question of, okay, 1980s, maybe 6 places to sit outside. 2009, 2008, how many places can you sit outside in downtown Davis? Give me a number. We went and counted them. We counted every seat. Help me here. What would you get? What's your guesses? 40, okay? This is movable chairs in restaurants outside, steps, walls, benches, any place that you can sit outside. Some of you have to rent. Some of it is free. So, last November. We have 57 locations that we mapped where there was areas of sittable areas. 40, is that all I get? Come on, you can do better than that. 500? How much? 120? Here's the results. Each red dot is a seat. 2,147. Pretty high number, pretty impressive. And then, so we zoomed in and we said, okay, well, if you look at the co-design projects and the things that we've done that I've shown you, do they really make a difference and add anything? And, the East Street Plaza has about 70 of those 2,000. The train station actually has a lot. John Hammond and his firm did that and did a good job of integrating seats. Davis Commons, 340 seats. That's counting all the seat walls and the movable chairs, and there's a lot there. But the winner, the prize winner of all this is our Central Park with 582 places to sit. That's 25% of every place in the downtown in Davis. So I thought, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So being researchers too, and kind of being curious, I thought, well, okay, we've got 2,000 downtown. What are they like? And this is kind of a diagram. Half of them are movable chairs, right? In places where you can actually move a chair around, which I think is a great solution. Then I thought, well, how does that compare to the campus? So Stephen and I just before Thanksgiving went around and we took this exact same area of the central campus with a kind of center point in the quad, and we said, what's the number of the campus? How many seating possibilities are there on the central campus? Same area, what would you say? More or less? Less? If you take a center point, it goes all the way down and just to kind of runs through Mac Hall, and it picks up just a corner of the Arboretum. So there's just a few places in the Arboretum. And it goes all the way to the back of Hunt, over to California, and over to First Street, A Street.
Does this include sitting on the grass?
No. Sittable space, central UC Davis campus. I feel like I'm dramatic here. 2,323 seats, more than the downtown. So the campus actually stands up pretty well. And then we said, okay, what's the difference? This will interest Skip because this is his job. If you compare the downtown to the UC Davis, we actually have, the campus has 174 more, but they're very similar, but they're extremely different. It's a completely different strategy to sitting. 4% are movable on campus. They don't like movable chairs. Everything is fixed. It's tied down. And when you go around and look at it, it's amazing. I saw benches I didn't even know exist. I mean, there must have been from the 30s. I mean, it's like a bench museum. And you got every size and shape. And the last project is one is a teaching example, and we do a lot of this in our teaching. This is a project in a studio of mine a couple years ago in Sacramento, Gold Rush Park, and we were asked by a group in Sacramento that was working on a vision. They had the vision, really, of creating a park larger than Central Park in downtown Sacramento. So you can think about, if you know Sacramento, I mean, how would you do that? So the concept was in the state capitol this is the state capitol here, and, the downtown, their concept was to take the area in Richards Boulevard, acquire the property, and to make a very large park that would connect the American River and the Sacramento River. And they asked us to do the design for it and also kind of the rationale for it. And what we found is it probably was about $5 billion worth of land acquisition to make this idea happen. So we had to put $5 billion worth of development into the design. So you see all the white in here is all development that essentially is more development that exists in the Richards Boulevard area. But it's new development, it's new urbanism, it's 5-story buildings overlooking a world-class park. And what it would do for Sacramento is transform Sacramento from what I call a go-through place to a go-to place. It would become the destination so that people would actually stop on their way from the Bay Area to the Lake Tahoe because there's something going on. It would be Sacramento's Balboa Park. It would be Sacramento's Golden Gate Park. And we got the chance to design it and present it to the community. It was written in the paper. It was on public radio. There was a lot of discussion. And I'm sorry to say that this project won't happen, or at least not in my lifetime, even though it really died a death, I think, because of the mayor, Heather Fargo, really wasn't interested in it. Even though she had graduated from our program years ago, she was much more interested in the landowners and things like that. So this is the students' work. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I'm out of time. What you need to know to do this kind of work, and again, you don't need to write it down. Jim will give you Michael will give you the written part of this. I call it 7 habits, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. You need to collaborate with the community and with the users, and you need to know things like organizational development. These are things for the students here. If you want to do this kind of work, this is the kind of courses you need to take. Group process, rhetoric, communication, negotiation, these are all things. You need to know something about community. You need to go out and, take a course in community studies and sociology, anthropology. You need to understand how communities come about. We couldn't have done Central Park without that. You need some courage. And I put Carl Lynn, who you saw last week, and Randy Hester on the top, who are people who really are courageous leaders who've stood up and literally laid in front of bulldozers to stop projects that they think shouldn't be built. You need to be an entrepreneur. You need to figure out how to do business stuff and make yourself survive in doing this kind of work. A couple more. No. and I'll stop. You got to keep at it. You got to be persistent. You just don't accept no. Keep working, even though, again, it may take decades to realize some of this stuff. You need to be persuasive. You need to convince people that your idea, your vision is an important one. So this is really important. And a lot of landscape architects don't have the personality to do this, but I hope you can develop it over time. And then finally, you need to reflect on what you're doing and critically look at it, kind of like what I showed you with the benches and movable chairs. You need to go back and look at your work and say, did it really work the way you intended or not? And there's a lot of methods that you can do that. That's my presentation. As I said in the beginning, it's not for everyone, but I find it a really fun and exciting way to work. So think about it. Thank you. Come down.
Grab him on the hallway back to his office. And we encourage you, if you're interested in becoming a proactive practitioner, to take courses from people like Mark, who's one of the gurus of proactive practice in the country. And so you have plenty of opportunity to do that. Thanks. Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay.